I have another question. It's a really fascinating one. It's from Tyler. Tyler writes in, he says, "Hey, Zach, I love your show and really enjoy listening to your work. I want to start off this question by saying that recently a friend of mine suffered a concussion, and I was very surprised by how long it takes a concussion victim to have a full recovery. It's around a month or 2 months before the brain is fully healthy. I mention this because I think you did Mason Rudolph a huge disservice by forgetting to mention his recent string of head injuries when comparing him to Duck Hodges. I don't think most people consider all the things players are willing to play through, especially the final stages of the concussion recovery process. I recently went back and looked at Mason Rudolph's statistics before his concussion, and they were really good. Much better than what he gets credit for. With that in mind, when you do your scheduled film analysis of Mason Rudolph, will you separate his pre-concussion and post-concussion film to help make a decision if Mason Rudolph is still concussed or if he's truly not very good?" Tyler, I really appreciate your concern for Mason Rudolph here. I think there is a conversation we should have about the catch-22 or the really tough predicament I think Mason Rudolph found himself in as a quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Before we do that, though, I also want to mention and hold that thought. I want to be very clear. There was no point this year when I watched Mason Rudolph, before concussions or after concussions, where I was impressed. Before, he was not great. After it never was good. And so I don't want to just rely on stats. You look at stats and you go, well, Mason Rudolph had completions or this or that or a touchdown or two. And it's like, Mason Rudolph, what I saw was a guy throwing a ton of checkdowns, a ton of throws underneath. I remember particularly he had one deep ball down the left sideline, I think to James Washington, that was really good. He had that game, his first start, I believe he had one good deep ball and a throw, like a pretty good throw to Juju Smith-Schuster that he took all the way to the house. And other than that, it's not great. And so, concussions aside, I just was never particularly impressed with Mason Rudolph. And I want you to remember that he left a lot of room to grow. Concussions or not, his play wasn't great. Now, this is the important part. Really, really, it matters. It's very important. I'm really glad you asked this question about concussions. First of all, I am not a doctor. I am not an expert on concussions. I'm going to talk about concussions a little bit, but you got to understand that I'm not an expert here. That's not, and I'm not pretending to be at all. But it's a really tough situation when you get hurt. When you get hurt, you have two options. You could sit out, and then if you don't play, maybe someone will take your spot, and that's painful and scary. And then the other option is you come in and play, but if you play badly because you're hurt, you might lose your spot anyways. You see the catch-22, you see the tough predicament. I feel sad for him. I don't know, but I know that if you're so injured, I do know this, if you are so injured that you cannot do your job well or do it effectively or can't play well, then you shouldn't play. Because in the long run, it hurts you more to play than it does to not play. I don't want you to also remember, though, we only see Mason Rudolph in games, but the Pittsburgh Steelers see Mason Rudolph in practice. They know how good he is or not. They decided as a franchise this year to move on from him and bench him and go to Duck Hodges because what they were seeing, not just in games, but clearly in practice, wasn't good enough. Now, again, I want to say I feel a lot of compassion. I feel sad for Mason Rudolph. I'm really lucky at my job. When I'm really tired or I'm depressed or I'm upset and I feel like I can't record, I just go to bed and record the next day. There's nobody sitting over there in the studio going, all right, I'm up. I'm going to take your job, Zach, because I don't have a competitor. It's the only person here. I'm in a place by myself. And the sad, harsh truth and reality about Mason Rudolph is that he did have someone ready to take his spot. And when he didn't play well, he lost that spot. And the truth, the other part of this is that you can't, concussions aside, injuries aside, it's heartbreaking. It's sad. But it can also be sad. Well, you can acknowledge that Mason Rudolph's poor play, him playing badly, is on him. That's his fault. If he was too hurt to perform well, he shouldn't have played. He should have stayed on the bench if he was too injured to play well. And so I have compassion for him. He had Duck Hodges breathing down his neck, ready to take his spot. And maybe the pressure from Duck Hodges, another good quarterback, an okay quarterback on the Steelers roster, caused him to come back from his injury before he was ready. But if he did that, he made a decision to play before he was ready. That's on him. Blame concussions all you want, but he made a choice. And If he wasn't healthy enough to play, he shouldn't have played. I know that's brutal. That's very difficult to have that conversation and to say that. But it's honest. I mean, it's not good. There's really not a clean way to talk about this because it's unfortunate. But Mason Rudolph decided to play, and he played badly. And so maybe he should have made the other decision. If he was so hurt that he couldn't play well, probably should have stayed on the bench.